There is still time to get your questions in using the chat window that you'll see on screen. We do have a couple here that we're ready to go through. Dionysia, this question was for you, but it is open to Sylvia if you want to add anything as well. Are you seeing a trend in more companies becoming willing to perhaps share their data publicly? And if so, what's driving that trend?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I am seeing, I think we've all seen in sort of the technology sector, the desire or willingness to share publicly their data related primarily to race and gender, and in what I would call engineering roles as compared to administrative or other roles. You know, I am not seeing, and Sylvia mentioned it, sort of the disaggregation of data shared more broadly from a lot of other companies that are not in the technology sector. Now, certainly companies report their information and they say, you know, by ethnicity it's X, by gender it's Y. But in terms of disaggregating the data, I am not seeing that as much. The trends are activist investors and also what I would call board members who have experiences across sectors or across companies within sectors where they've had the ability to see diversity and inclusion efforts that may be more advanced than those that they're seeing at other companies. And so that's driving a different discussion too. At least in my work with my clients, I'm seeing differences where there are board members who have a broader experience or exposure in this space, and they kind of cross-pollinate, share that information or those insights with other companies that then increases at least their internal awareness around data and how it can drive decision-making, and or even if it's not data focused, just here are some things we need to be thinking about from a business perspective. And Sylvia, I don't know if you're seeing things differently in your space.
No, I mean, I think law firms, the large law firms share data because we do for now for law students, and we give all of our data yearly. There's a big law firm survey, the Vault FCCA survey, and they collect all the demographic data, hires, terms, current workforce demographics, and that's available for anyone to see and compare the hundreds of firms that have completed the data. So I think that there's a fair amount of transparency with those numbers, at least with the law firms.
Thank you so much. Another question that dropped in from our audience here. Are you experiencing or have you noticed that companies are perhaps encountering backlash with their D&I efforts, and perhaps how do you find that companies are dealing with said backlash?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. I am seeing what I would call backlash. And maybe backlash, you know, for some environments, it may be a little bit, maybe less, maybe using a different word. But what I find is that what helps oftentimes can be both education about unconscious biases and how they impact decision making for people who really in an organization want to understand this space. You know, they're open to the idea that unconscious biases exist, and they're not limited to just Caucasians or men, but that every group, every person may have unconscious biases. And if we all kind of thought through a conversation that we may have had in the last year or two, where something that we said or something we thought as we were talking to a particular colleague or friend or stranger in the grocery store, and we say to ourselves, I wonder why I thought that, or why did I use that word? It's just an indication that our brains are constantly moving and making associations and informing what we say and do. So I think for people who are interested in understanding that and adjusting their behaviors, that unconscious bias kinds of training and in-depth discussions with colleagues can be useful to countering the backlash. I also think that we could all do a better job of sharing short articles that have managers an opportunity to be educated and to think differently about how they're engaging their decision making in the workplace. And I do think panel interviews kind of help. They help give people a different perspective on it. So I'm a big advocate of kind of educating in conversation and personal stories, kind of helping to shift the space. And then I understand, that we all exist in a reality where there may be a component of our workforces that simply, no matter how you try to educate or how careful you are in the things that you say that urge them to think more broadly, they're just not going to. They don't care to. And then thinking through, when that is the case, kind of a broader conversation about whether that person should be in a management or leadership role if their behaviors are inconsistent with the organization. So I'll pause on that.
I know we're out of time, but I wanted to just add that I don't see the pushback as much as I see the fatigue. I think people are like, why are we still talking about this? And especially if we've made any gains, it's like, oh, I think this has solved itself. So I see more fatigue, and maybe part of that fatigue is leading to pushback, but I see more fatigue than pushback. But I know we're at time, so I'm going to shut up.
Thank you so much. I know we've got we're running very, very short on time. I do have one more question here for Sylvia. It is a very quick one here. You mentioned that it's a source of frustration, perhaps, that you do encounter sometimes D&I committees with little to no power. How would you empower them? Is it just a case of the structure of the group, say getting more executives on board, or are there any other means of empowering these groups?
Yeah, that's a great question that I've thought a lot about. And I think it is to get some people who actually have leadership roles within the organization on that too. And then also having the organization's management empower the group. Tell them that, you're empowered to make the decisions, and we will, subject to whatever limits, implement the recommendations. But in general, what I see is that these organizations are acting in a vacuum outside of the true power of the organization, and coming up with just these great ideas that cannot be implemented. So I have arrived at the conclusion that for me, I would like passion and power, but if I have to choose, I want a diverse, I don't care if it's a diversity and inclusion committee of mostly white men. I want a committee that is committed, that has power to make things happen.